Some artists spend their entire careers entertaining audiences with fireworks and noise. Gary Rossington differed. He didn't need to yell, wail into a mic, or rip the stage up. The world knew with one gentle guitar slide and Free Bird. The last man with Lynyrd Skynyrd's soul. Not only was Rossington the lead guitarist, the founder, survivor, and keeper, he powered Skynyrd's victories and sorrows silently for over 50 years. Gary took Southern rock from Jacksonville's humble garages to America's greatest stadiums with his initial slide in Tuesday's Gone and Simple Man's eerie sustain. His life was more than music. Accidents, heartache, and long nights of physical and emotional anguish characterized it. Gary lost his father as a child, pals in a plane crash, and nearly himself to alcohol and sadness. Not being a perfect hero made him real, down to every note he played. People understood Gary Rossington wasn't merely the last Skynyrd member after his 2023 death amid that awful quiet. He was the last emblem of a musical age that would never return, even without the spotlight. Not until the band became part of him did he leave. His wife, Dale Krantz Rossington, saw his death. "When did you first hear Free Bird?" If that music seems familiar, Gary Rossington never left. Early life. Gary Rossington was born in Jacksonville, Florida, a poor southern city with wooden houses, red dust, and dawn roosters, on December 4, 1951. Young Gary lived in a world of paradoxes, serene on the outside but quietly suffering losses no one could see. He was young when his father died. An abrupt death left more than a gap in the household. Long silence about Gary's childhood. Bernice, a religious Southern woman, raised him with the tenacity of a widow determined to move her family forward. No one in that small community thought the slender, soft-spoken child would hush millions with his guitar. Gary relied on a cheap guitar and a baseball dream as a child without a father. He spent days playing baseball in the park, dreaming of wearing the Yankees' pinstriped uniform. Strangely, fate changed. Gary met Ronnie Van Zant and Bob Burns during an amateur game, two buddies who helped him become one of America's best rock bands. Music didn't start that friendship. It started with dusty baseball fields, cracked bats, and teen mischief. However, the three lads began playing together after discovering they shared a passion for music, particularly the Rolling Stones and Cream. First in garages, then on school grounds, then wherever with power and a few heads nodding to the beat. Gary wasn't a star student. He was often chastised for not paying attention, leaving class to play guitar, and feeling out of place. He didn't mind because he had found something else that made him feel heard without music. When that guitar played, Gary was no longer fatherless. He joined a sound, a Southern soul calling him. From that youthful heart, Gary Rossington began a journey he never anticipated would span over 50 years. Early career, raw, hungry guitar chords in a late 1960s Jacksonville garage's heat. Gary Rossington, Ronnie Van Zant, Alan Collins, Bob Burns, and Larry Junstrom experimented with repeating licks to create their own blues country and British rock sound here. After calling themselves the Noble Five, then 1%, they chose Lynyrd Skynyrd, named after their P, which sounded funny but became famous. Teacher who suspended them for lengthy hair. Gary was 16. Though not a flashy or technically advanced guitarist, his style caught people's attention. Gentle slip across strings, not loud or complicated, like a wound being sliced clean through the air. Without formal instruction or music reading, Rossington created a slide guitar sound that would define Southern rock via instinct and sorrow. The band began playing in school gyms, small halls, and smoky clubs where the crowd was often drunker than attentive. Skynyrd persisted. They trained and performed constantly, and Gary always moved back to make room for Ronnie's fire, as if he knew his function was to anchor, lift, not steal the stage. After years of patience and a demo tape sent to producer Al Cooper, Lynyrd Skynyrd published their debut album, Lynyrd Skynyrd, in 1973. Free Bird soared, 9 minutes of real Southern soul driven by an opening slide guitar that appeared to split the fog, and audiences across America knew they were seeing something unusual. That slide was played by Gary Rossington. He was neither flashy or legendary, but his tone made the world stop, and that was just the beginning. Rossington and Skynyrd had taken their first step toward becoming American rock pillars after years of banging on studio doors and playing night after night in forgotten locales. Gary, the child who was suspended for having long hair, was now utilizing his hair and guitar to write a new chapter in Southern music. Career breakthrough. From 1973 to 1977, Lynyrd Skynyrd exploded in America. They weren't charismatic like the Eagles or introspective like Neil Young. They brought dust, alcohol, and the South's rebellious spirit, where pride and pain were constantly linked. Gary Rossington, whose guitar slid slowly and ominously, was at the center. Like every note had a sad tale untold. The defiant, singable chorus of Rossington, Ed King, and Ronnie Van Zant's 1974 song Sweet Home Alabama captivated the nation. I hope Neil Young remembers that Southern men don't need him. Rossington crafted that soft, proud, and seductively rhythmic guitar riff that made the song an anthem, while the media focused on its political message. Rossington was never loud in the band. Gary kept time, literally and metaphorically, while Ronnie led the stage and Alan Collins was chaotic. He was the only one who could bridge artistic lunacy and musical discipline. Rossington became more prominent with Skynyrd albums like Second Helping 1974, Nothing Fancy 1975, Gimme Back My Bullets 1976, and Street Survivors 1977. They relied on him. But success was risky. Fame led to parties, drugs, and heavy drinking for the band. Rossington, however quiet, was vulnerable. Just days before a gig in 1976, he crashed his Ford Torino into a tree and house. He lived, but was gravely hurt. The song That Smell followed. Rossington and Alan Collins were targeted by Ronnie Van Zant's biting warning. "Oh, that fragrance. Can you smell that? Death odors surround you." Gary performed despite physical and mental injuries. After Street Survivors' October 1977 cover showed the band in flames, Skynyrd was at its peak, preparing for a major nationwide tour. Only 3 days of splendor. On October 20th, 1977, the band's jet crashed into a Mississippi woodland. Southern rock history was eternally divided into pre- and post-crash eras. Gary Rossington survived again, but his most glorious artistic chapter undoubtedly ended with the shriek of shredding metal and a soul permanently broken. October 20th, 1977, Tragedy and Resurrection. The Convair 240 carrying Lynyrd Skynyrd crashed into a secluded Mississippi woodland 3 days after Street Survivors were released. The disaster killed frontman Ronnie Van Zant, siblings Steve and Cassie Gaines, assistant Dean Kilpatrick, and both pilots. Gary Rossington lived, but it cost him much. Broken arms, legs, wrists, pelvis. After being left unconscious and assumed dead for hours, he walked again after nearly a year. Deepest wounds weren't bodily. In his soul, they lay. Rossington remarked, "We were sent back into hell after reaching heaven." His dearest buddy, band co-founder, and sibling died. Gary suffered from survivor's remorse for years. Why was he alive yet Ronnie wasn't? Resurrection didn't heal. Deep despair gripped Gary. To dull his daily misery, he drank, took painkillers, and later harder narcotics. To punish himself, he rarely left the house, avoided everyone, and replayed old Skynyrd tapes. Many thought Skynyrd was over and Gary Rossington would be left devastated and lost. Gary played music, his only skill, in the midst of anguish. He founded the Rossington Collins Band with Alan Collins in 1979 to regain himself, not Skynyrd. Dale Krantz, the new band's female lead singer, aimed to break free from the past. Their 1980 debut album, Anytime, Anyplace, Anywhere, was somewhat successful. For Gary, it was huge spiritual victory. He recovered, went to treatment, forgave himself, and returned to himself, though not completely. Dale Krantz, with her flaming red hair and commanding voice, was more than his musical collaborator. She rescued him from the abyss. They fell in love, married, and created the Rossington Band after Rossington Collins disbanded. To Dale, Gary wasn't a living guitarist. Husband, father, and adored for who he was. She was his lone light at his darkest time. By now, Gary Rossington's life was no longer heroic. The story was about survival. Survival after a plane crash, addiction, buddy deaths, and losing his old self. When the world feared he would be forgotten, Gary picked up his guitar, stood up, and continued, not to be famous but to keep the music alive. Gary Rossington was silent on stage but grateful in his personal life, especially to the woman who saved him. Gary met Dale Krantz shortly after the plane tragedy, when his life was darkest and most fragile. She sang lead in the Rossington Collins Band, but something deeper grew between practices and painful backstage moments. It was a gentle romance between two broken souls who found each other in the rubble and held on to hope. Dale stood out in rock and roll at the time. She didn't chase fame, drugs, or after parties. Instead, she supported Gary when he couldn't walk on stage, vomited blood from drinking, and swore he didn't want to live. She stayed. She clutched his hand and started over with a guitar, a broken body, and a barely beating heart. They wed in the early 1980s. The mending and rebuilding process was slow. The Rossington Band played tiny tours to keep living and playing music, not to recapture stardom. They have 2 children and lived much of their lives in a modest Georgia home, away from parties and stage lights. Gary stated in a rare interview that Dale was the first Skynyrd disbeliever. She regarded me as a hurting but determined man. This affection was a reminder of Gary's losses and the wonder of what he kept. No scandals, no news. Their marriage was quiet like the man. It survived in silence. Gary Rossington may have remained another unhealed rock wound if Dale Krantz hadn't arrived into his life, but her love gave him life. After Gary Rossington died on March 5, 2023, the world lost more than a musician. Southern rock lost its last gatekeeper, the guy who had kept the flame blazing for nearly 50 years without letting it die. The media never focused on Rossington. He didn't win Grammys, star in documentaries, or have grandiose storylines. However, in true music, where each note may evoke a place, Gary was irreplaceable. Rossington's distinctive Gibson SG glided smoothly across every phrase, creating a unique sound. A Southern voice, melancholic, proud, wild, and human. Songs like Simple Man, Tuesday's Gone, That Smell, and Free Bird were more than tunes. They were the heartbeat of a generation of Americans raised amid conflict, upheaval, and a desire to stay faithful to their roots. Chris Stapleton, Blackberry Smoke, and Blackstone Cherry have all credited Rossington. In music and life, resiliently and quietly, he remained true to his legacy. Rossington performed at Lynyrd Skynyrd's 2006 Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction. Instead of giving a big statement, Rossington just remarked, "I wish Ronnie, Alan, Steve, and all others who came before could be standing here with me." He was always in the background, but never missing. Skynyrd played Free Bird like no other band. Rossington carried more than anyone else, not because of skill. Trauma, love, and bandmate deaths. Survival and a deep loyalty to his defining music. Gary Rossington's chart legacy is gone. The hearts of those who heard him play were taken to a distant southern land where Ronnie's voice still echoes, the free bird still flies, and a single slide across the strings still stings like an unspoken goodbye. Final years. Old age hit Gary Rossington hard. Once considered healed, 1977 plane crash injuries resurfaced like ghosts. His heart spoke out after years of substance addiction, touring, and rock and roll's physical toll. Rossington had stent implants, a heart assist device, and an open heart surgery in 2015 that had the rock world worried he'd never perform again from the early 2000s. Back he came, slow and gentle, playing each free bird note as a reminder. He was still there, and Skynyrd hadn't stopped. After another operation in 2021, Rossington decided to stop touring and let someone else play guitar. Some nights, still recuperating, his wounds scarcely closed, he silently returned to stage. Play a couple short passages without introduction or fanfare. It made the audience cry. Gary Rossington, 71, died on March 5, 2023. There was no major reason. The heart was exhausted after too many years of loss, suffering, and recollection. Death ended the original Lynyrd Skynyrd story. No initial members remained. Though not a superstar, he was the last to remember everything, therefore the rock community worldwide mourned. He was the last guitar in a sacred orchestra where every note carried blood, grief, and the spirits of the dead. Lynyrd Skynyrd performed Free Bird after his death, but Rossington's guitar section was from an old recording. No one dared replace him. No one could. The guitar wasn't just an instrument to Gary Rossington. It was past. It hurt. We were pals. It was love. It was the South. This was everything. That sound persisted after he left. Like a bird never landing. Gary Rossington never sought immortality. He didn't conduct deep press interviews, seek scandal, or follow trends. However, his modest perseverance and unwavering dedication to music made him one of Southern rock's most revered individuals. After a plane crash, he became depressed and addicted and lost all his friends. But he persisted. He stood up, took his guitar, and played as if every note were a way to keep them alive in his heart. For decades, he was Lynyrd Skynyrd's last witness, guardian of the band's soul, and linked to the past. We're losing more than an artist with Gary Rossington's death. Bidding farewell to a chapter in history of free birds, long, echoing guitar notes that sounded like the South's heartbeat, and a man who lived his entire life to play with what was left in his heart. Click like, subscribe, and turn on the bell to help us share actual stories about real people if you think musicians like Gary Rossington should be remembered for their loyalty, not their volume. Where did you first hear Free Bird? Leave a comment because sometimes one song is enough to recall everything. In the next video, the music continues.